flesh. So that's the person, the Christos, or the Messiah, the anointed one. And that's, Jesus actually says, which is very, very powerful, he says the whole Bible is about him. That's what he says. The Psalms, and remember, it's broken down into three categories, the law, the Psalms, and the prophets. And he said, all of this is about me. So, yes, Jesus claimed to be fully God. Hello?
Yeah, I had unmuted Dalton's call. I was going to wait and see if Dalton was going to respond.
Thank you. That's straightens it up a little bit, but if you look in John 3:16-17, which is my favorite verse, it says, "For God sent his Son into the world." Oh, crud. This is so embarrassing. No, I know this verse, and I'm half asleep, so you guys will forgive me. But anyway, it's referring to God's Son, and I was thinking Jesus, but then again,
Dalton,
if
what is
Jesus
it? Tell me what the verse. Dalton, tell me what the verse is. I'll look it up for you. Can you hear me?
John 3:16-17.
Okay, let me look that up.
One reason I'm half asleep is because we were swamped today.
It says, John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." Dalton.
So the question that goes with that verse is, who is he referring to, us as his sons, or is he referring to someone else?
What, you want to take that, Debbie?
No, go right ahead. I've just called on Vic.
No, he's referring to Christ. The whole point is if you follow through with that, it's all about Christ. Now, remember this. Some people get a little bit confused. Christ had a lot of different titles. And son, in fact, Christ was, as I think of it, Christ was at least three sons. He was the son of Abraham. He was the son of man. And he was the Son of God. Now, the term Son of God is a divine title. And what that simply means is a son has the same nature. A son has the same nature as a father. And so whatever the nature of the Father is, that is the nature that the Son carries. That's why Jesus could say, the Father and I are what? One nature, not one person, but one nature. You see, I and my Father are one. And so Son of God is the strongest way in English. Now, in another language, it may be presented another way. I'm not sure of their morphology or their structure. But in English, the strongest way you can depict nature is to say it the way it's said. Christ is the Son of God. That doesn't mean he was produced by God. That just simply is a linguistic adaptation to say to us that Christ, the Son, has the same nature as the Father. And the Father-Son paradigm or model is a consistent one throughout history. So God uses
Genesis.
A lot of words that are familiar to us. And that helps us, because if God spoke to us in a language other than ours, we wouldn't understand it. So God speaks to us in our language. And I think we've shared the term anthropomorphism, God being represented in human terms. And one of the way God represents himself in human terms is to use human language. Does that make sense? Do you follow that? Hello, is anyone there?
I do follow it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You were silent just for a moment. Could you hear me when I asked the question, or was there a delay?
I did hear you. Debbie had muted me.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah, so Father, Son, remember, that's a beautiful pairing and expression, but it expresses nature. Like you have the same nature as your Father, and that nature is being human, right?
Right.
So Christ has the same nature. And remember, Paul talks about, I believe it's kenosis, or the emptying. Christ laid aside this effulgence, this, God dwells in this unapproachable light. So Christ laid aside a lot of the prerogatives in order to be born a man and die. God can't die by definition because God is the essence of life. So the whole point of Christ, being born is so that he could actually reverse what our first parents did in the garden where they sinned. So if they had to die, they could never live. Someone had to die for them, and this substitutionary death is what Christ came to do, is to die for the whole of humanity. And now, all the ones that will be saved, all they have to do now is trust in what God did, for them. Now, some people see that as, they don't take it seriously, but they really should think a second time and look at that with a little bit more seriousness, because no one knows what happens after death. That's a mystery to most people, and all of us dread death. There are none of us who really, look forward to death, unless we're very ill or sick. But and even if we have the attitude that, I don't care about death, we don't want someone close to us to die. So ultimately, all of us have a great respect and a repulsion for death. We repel death. We don't like that, either for ourselves or those whom we love, or just human beings in general, because many of us have an expanded care and concern for people in general. So this is God's way of really providing a means of salvation to some of a race in which all were lost. Now that's God's perspective, not mine. And go ahead.
I just was agreeing with you. I said, I got you. I understand.
Yeah. Well, again, just remember, Christ is at least three sons, and those are titles. He's the son of Abraham. He's the son of David. He's the son of man, and he's the son of God. That's actually four.
But I think a lot of people get confused because they want to think of son like a baby, like God found a girlfriend and they got married and they had a child and they named it Jesus. And I don't think that's what... You know what I mean? They had a baby shower and a little stroller. But I don't know. I don't think that's what it is, right?
Right. Well, see, what people have to understand, and I say this all the time, any analogy, human analogy, breaks down at a certain point when it applies to God. It can give us some, it can be helpful in us understanding God to a degree. But just understand, God is going to supersede any example that we can utilize. But what I often say is man and woman had to come from somewhere. I hope this clears it up. And you couldn't start out with man and woman. I mean, they couldn't start out by themselves. They had to come from somewhere. And what often happens, because, we're so locked into our everyday experience, many of us can't think outside it. I remember in one college course, they were teaching us about what's called linguistic relativism and linguistic determinism. In some positions, language is just relative to what we thought, as opposed to language determining our thoughts. And so what happens with many people is we can think outside the language. We can actually think, we can use the language to think beyond the language, if you follow what I'm saying. So when it comes to man and woman, they had to come from somewhere. They couldn't produce themselves. So the cycle had to be initiated, and that's very, very important. I think it was Carl Sagan, when he was questioned as to where the universe came from, even as a scientist, I think he copped out. He says, well, we don't need to deal with that because science does deal with essence. And so that's just, that's very important. So God claims that he created man and woman. And if you think of man and woman evolving, that would never happen. They would have to get there at the same time. be reproductively capable, because on an evolutionary scale, there just wouldn't be enough time. There wouldn't ever be enough time for something to create itself. In fact, that's impossible for something to create itself. And so I'm just saying God had to start the process. Adam and Eve didn't have a mother and father. Even though Adam prophesied, about the ultimate family structure, that a man and a woman would leave, the ones dearest to them and start their own family. And that is supposed to be a sacred relationship, the husband and wife bond, which most of us, Debbie, and we get into this, we don't have it, and we're scared to deal with it. We're scared to deal with the most sacred institution known to man. And I think we only do hurt to ourselves by being fearful to deal with it, substantively, that is.
Amen. I think you should be a preacher, Mr. Solution.
Well, it's not that, Dalton. It's just that, well, thank you, but it's just talking to people. I mean, a teacher, I think, is better than a preacher. A teacher is much better than a preacher because a teacher, I think they say preaching is uninterrupted teaching. I think an expository teacher is an individual that gets more actual understanding than a preacher ever does, because people just give lip service to respecting a preacher, and oftentimes preachers don't change the behavior of people, and they don't answer the questions that people really have. So it's a kind of weird relationship that many preachers and their parishioners have. So I much prefer the position as just being someone who aids another person in learning after I learn something myself. So I think an expository teacher is far more effective than a preacher.
Well, if there was a opening for one somewhere, I think you'd be a really good candidate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Deb, I am enjoying this, and I don't want to, but I'm exhausted. Like I said, I turned between 50 to 200 tickets today. We were just swamped, and I'm going to bed.
Well, I'm glad that you called, and I will be talking to you later, my love. You know we love you. Thank you for calling in, Dalty Pops. And tell Emily we love her, too. Yep. All right? And I'm going to go now to area code 954. You're on the board with Debbie and with Mr. Solution.
Good evening, Debbie.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Solution.
Hey, how are you, sir?
Not bad. I would just like to ask you, sir. You cannot talk about a subject matter, especially of things that people are doing at this age, unless you have a precedence for it, right? Because if you don't have a precedence for something, then how do you know what you're doing is right? Now, let me put this question to you. In the Bible, it says that God ordained Christ a lamb, slain before the foundation of the world. Now, would you agree that for God to preordain his son to be slain for sins that human being would commit way before he created anything, that is suggesting that he premeditated to make mankind sinful? Don't you agree with that?